The first thing I noticed wasn't the beeping machines or the antiseptic smell. It was the silence. Complete devastating silence where there should have been voices, laughter, or at least the rustle of someone shifting in a bedside chair. I opened my eyes to white walls, fluorescent lighting, and absolutely nothing else. No flowers, no cards, no family photos taped to the wall. Just emptiness that felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I tried calling out, my voice cracking like old leather. Nobody answered. Then I saw it on the nightstand, crumpled and waiting like a death sentence. My father's handwriting on hospital stationery. "We stopped paying, good luck." The heart monitor exploded into frantic beeping as everything I believed about love shattered. 3 months earlier, life had been completely different. I'm Conrad, and I used to think I had the perfect American family. We lived in a ranch-style house in Lakewood just outside Denver with a 2-car garage and a backyard where Dad taught me to throw a football. My father, Michael, ran Morrison Construction, a small business he'd built from nothing after high school. He wasn't rich, but he was proud of providing honest work for 8 employees and keeping food on our table. Mom worked as a secretary at Jefferson Elementary, coming home every afternoon with stories about kindergarteners who'd lost their lunch money, or 3rd graders who'd drawn pictures of their families. Linda Morrison was the kind of woman who baked cookies for school fundraisers and knew every neighbor's first name. She had this way of humming while she folded laundry that made the whole house feel safe. My sister Sarah was 22, studying nursing at Community College of Denver. She wanted to work in pediatrics because she said kids needed people who truly cared about their recovery. Sarah had this gentle way of explaining medical procedures that made even shots seem less scary when she practiced on me. She'd already completed most of her clinical rotations and was planning to graduate the following spring. Jake, my younger brother, was 19 and figuring out his future at Front Range Community College. He was studying business administration, dreaming of maybe joining Dad's construction company someday and expanding it into residential development. Jake had these big ideas about building affordable housing for young families, the kind of ambitious thinking that made Dad's eyes light up during dinner conversations. I'd been working construction with Dad for 2 years since graduating high school, learning everything from foundation pouring to electrical basics. The plan was to save money for trade school, maybe get certified in plumbing or HVAC repair. Dad always said skilled trades would never disappear, that people would always need houses built and maintained. He was teaching me the business side too, how to bid jobs and manage crews. The accident happened on a Tuesday morning in September. We were working on renovating a downtown office building, converting it into luxury condos. I was installing roofing materials on the 8th floor when everything went wrong. The crane operator later said he'd been distracted by a phone call from his ex-wife about child support payments. He swung the load of steel beams too fast, clipping the edge of the scaffolding platform where I was working. I remember the sound first. Metal scraping against metal, then a sharp crack, like a tree branch snapping. The platform tilted, and suddenly I was falling through empty air, with pieces of scaffolding tumbling around me like deadly confetti. 30 feet down to the concrete sidewalk. The impact drove consciousness out of me like air from punctured lungs. Emergency surgery saved my life, but barely. Severe head trauma, 3 broken ribs, a shattered left arm, and internal bleeding that required 2 additional operations. The neurosurgeon, Dr. Peterson, explained to my family that brain swelling had triggered a protective coma. Recovery could take days, weeks, or months. There were no guarantees I'd ever wake up normally. During those first weeks, my family lived at the hospital. Dad slept in waiting room chairs, his work clothes wrinkled and paint-stained. Mom brought homemade sandwiches and thermoses of coffee, feeding my siblings. And Dad, like they were patients too. Sarah coordinated with nurses, asking detailed questions about my care and learning medical terminology so she could better understand my condition. Jake skipped classes to maintain the vigil reading sports magazines aloud and playing music from my phone. They decorated my room with get-well cards from Dad's crew neighbors and my old high school friends. Mom brought my favorite blanket from home, the blue one she'd made when I was 12. Sarah posted photos of family vacations on the bulletin board where I could see them if I woke up. Jake even brought my baseball gloves, saying the smell of leather might trigger positive memories. But I started remembering arguments during my semi-conscious periods. Dad's voice strained and desperate, talking to someone about second mortgages and payment plans. Mom crying in the hallway, whispering to Sarah about taking night shifts cleaning offices. The insurance from Dad's small business covered basic care, but intensive care unit charges were astronomical. Each day cost more than Dad's crew earned in a week. The conversations grew darker. Dad shouting at insurance representatives about coverage limits and pre-existing condition clauses. Mom pleading with hospital billing departments about payment extensions. Sarah asking academic advisors about withdrawal procedures and tuition refunds. Jake researching student loan deferments and part-time job opportunities. Then came the night when everything changed. I heard Dad on his cell phone in the hallway, his voice broken with exhaustion. 3 months of this will bankrupt us completely. Sarah's education, Jake's future, the house, everything we've built. I don't know what else to do. Mom's response was barely audible through my closed door. He's our son, Michael, our baby. But even she sounded defeated, like someone drowning who'd finally stopped fighting the current. The memories came in painful fragments as I lay in that empty hospital bed. During my deepest coma periods, I'd somehow remained partially aware of the world around me. Conversations filtered through like distant radio stations, and the picture they painted was devastating. Dad's construction business started falling apart almost immediately. Without his daily supervision, job sites experienced delays and cost overruns. 3 major clients canceled contracts when Dad couldn't guarantee completion dates. His best foreman, Carlos, quit to work for a competitor who could offer steady paychecks. The business Dad had spent 15 years building was collapsing while he maintained his bedside vigil. Mom's secretary's salary couldn't begin to cover our family's normal expenses, let alone medical bills that accumulated like snow in a blizzard. She took a second job cleaning office buildings from midnight to 6 in the morning, then worked at the elementary school all day. I remembered hearing her exhausted voice during rare visits, words slurred with fatigue, as she updated me on neighborhood news I could no longer participate in. Sarah made the heartbreaking decision to withdraw from nursing school just 8 months before graduation. She took a full-time position at Murphy's Diner, working double shifts to contribute every possible dollar to my medical care. Her dream of helping sick children was sacrificed on the altar of my survival. The irony cut deep even in my unconscious state. Jake sold his car and moved back into his childhood bedroom, taking a job at a warehouse loading dock. His business administration classes were reduced to part-time evening studies that he often skipped due to exhaustion. The future he'd been building crumbled like poorly mixed concrete. The family meetings happened late at night after visiting hours when they thought I couldn't hear. Dad's voice grew harder with each passing week, discussing realistic options and quality of life considerations. Mom's protests became weaker, worn down by financial pressure and emotional exhaustion. Sarah and Jake argued about whether I would want to destroy the family's future for a recovery that might never come. Hospital social workers introduced concepts like long-term care facilities and Medicaid qualifications. The private room with its window overlooking the mountains was replaced by a shared space with a roommate whose television played game shows at volumes that penetrated my comatose state. Personal nurses became overworked staff members who checked on me between dozens of other patients. The most devastating conversation happened during week 10 of my coma. Dad was on the phone with someone from the hospital's financial office, his voice completely empty of hope. We've refinanced everything we can, sold Linda's jewelry, cashed out retirement accounts borrowed against the business. There's nothing left. The person on the other end must have mentioned state-funded facilities because Dad's next words hit like physical blows. How long before we can transfer him? We need to think about our other children's futures now. Mom's breakdown that night was audible through my closed door. Deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the center of her soul. Sarah, trying to comfort her with words that sounded hollow, even to my unconscious mind. We've done everything we could, Mom. Conrad would understand. He'd want us to survive. But there were other conversations I was only now beginning to understand. A well-dressed man with an authoritative voice had been trying to visit me repeatedly. Each time my family intercepted him claiming I wasn't ready for business discussions or legal complications. He mentioned urgent matters related to my 18th birthday and inheritance proceedings, but Dad dismissed him as some kind of insurance investigator or lawsuit representative trying to take advantage of our tragedy. The man grew increasingly insistent as weeks passed. This young man has legal rights that are being activated by his current circumstances. He told Dad during one heated hallway exchange I barely remembered. There are provisions in place that could change everything for him. But Dad, overwhelmed by medical decisions and financial crisis, treated these interruptions as unwelcome distractions from more pressing concerns. Looking back now, I realized my family had been so focused on the immediate crisis that they'd missed something enormous. The mysterious visitor wasn't trying to exploit our situation. He was trying to save it. But by the time I understood this, my family had already made their terrible decision. The final weeks of my coma brought a clarity that was almost worse than unconsciousness. My brain was healing awareness, returning in waves, but my body remained unresponsive. I became a prisoner in my own mind, forced to listen as my family planned my abandonment with the clinical efficiency of a military withdrawal. Dad's conversations with the state facility were businesslike, devoid of the emotion that had characterized earlier discussions. We need the transfer completed by Friday. Yes, I understand the quality of care will be different. We've accepted that reality. He sounded like he was arranging disposal of construction materials, not his son's future. Mom stopped visiting daily, then stopped altogether. When she did appear, her conversations with me were stilted artificial, like she was rehearsing lines for a play she didn't want to perform. You're going to a nice place, sweetheart. They'll take good care of you there. Maybe it's better this way. Her voice carried the tone of someone trying to convince herself as much as me. Sarah's nursing education made her conversations the most painful. She explained my condition in clinical terms, discussing feeding tubes and physical therapy protocols with detached professionalism. The state facility has adequate medical staff, she told Jake during one visit. It's not like we're abandoning him to die, we're just accepting that recovery might take years, and we can't sacrifice everyone's future on that possibility. Jake's farewell was the hardest to process. He sat beside my bed for an entire afternoon, talking about memories from our childhood dreams we'd shared, promises we'd made. But his words carried the finality of a eulogy. I hope you understand someday, Conrad. We're not doing this because we don't love you. We're doing it because we love each other too, and this is killing everyone. The mysterious lawyer's attempts to reach me became desperate during those final days. He appeared at the hospital multiple times, trying to convince anyone who would listen that I had legal rights requiring immediate attention. This young man is the primary beneficiary of one of the largest private trusts in Colorado, he told a hospital administrator. His family is making decisions based on incomplete information, but the administrator's hands were tied by privacy laws and family consent procedures. Without my parents' cooperation or my own conscious consent, he couldn't act on the lawyer's claims. The bureaucratic maze designed to protect patients' rights became the very mechanism that prevented my rescue. I heard Dad's final conversation with the lawyer, a heated exchange in the hospital parking lot that drifted through my open window. "My son is dying and you're talking about money. Get away from my family before I call security." The lawyer's response was desperate. "Mr. Morrison, you don't understand. Your son isn't just some inheritance recipient. He's about to become one of the wealthiest young men in America. This accident has triggered legal provisions that could solve all your financial problems." But Dad was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by grief and guilt to process what the lawyer was saying. He heard opportunistic exploitation where he should have heard salvation. "My son's not a lottery ticket," Dad shouted. "He's a human being and we're trying to do what's best for him." The cruel irony was that Dad was right about my humanity, but completely wrong about what was best for me. The night before my transfer, my family gathered for what they clearly believed was their final goodbye. Each person spoke to my unconscious form like they were delivering graveside eulogies. Dad apologized for failing as a provider. Mom begged forgiveness for choosing the family's survival over my recovery. Sarah promised to finish nursing school in my honor. Jake swore he'd become successful enough to provide better care for me someday. Then they packed my personal belongings into plastic bags, removed the family photos from my bulletin board, and prepared to sign the papers that would transfer me to a state facility with minimal care and no hope of recovery. They left behind only the essentials basic medical equipment hospital gowns and a note explaining their decision. But as they walked away from my room for the last time, none of them knew they were abandoning $760 million. The Morrison family was about to discover that sometimes the greatest tragedies and the greatest miracles can be separated by nothing more than a single conversation they were too broken to have. The tears came in waves as I finished reading Dad's abandonment note. Each word felt like a physical assault. "We stopped paying. Good luck." 24 letters that destroyed everything I'd believed about family loyalty and love. The heart monitor's frantic beeping brought nurses running, but I couldn't speak, couldn't explain that the pain wasn't physical. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone, in a world that suddenly felt as cold and empty as the hospital room itself. The family I'd loved unconditionally had calculated my worth against their convenience and found me lacking. They'd chosen their own survival over mine without even the courage to say goodbye in person. The sobs came from somewhere deeper than my chest, a place where hope and trust used to live. I cried for the father who'd taught me to throw a football, but couldn't find the strength to keep me alive. I cried for the mother who'd made my favorite blanket, but couldn't cover me with love when I needed it most. I cried for siblings who'd shared my childhood, but couldn't share my crisis. Then the door opened. A distinguished older gentleman entered, first wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Dad's monthly income. His silver hair was precisely styled, and his confident bearing suggested someone accustomed to controlling important situations. Behind him walked a professional woman in her 40s, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that announced significant business. "Mr. Morrison," the woman said, her voice warm but authoritative. "My name is Patricia Walsh. I'm your court-appointed legal representative." She gestured to her companion. "This is Harrison Webb, executor of the Morrison Family Trust. We've been trying to reach you for quite some time." I stared at them through tear-blurred vision, too emotionally shattered to process what was happening. Legal Representative Family Trust. None of this made sense in the context of my abandoned, penniless existence. Patricia pulled a chair beside my bed and sat down with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered life-changing news for a living. "Conrad, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. Your maternal great-grandfather was Thomas Morrison, one of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs during the 1950s and 60s. Harrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents. Thomas Morrison, founded Morrison Technologies, Morrison Communications, and Morrison Investments. When he died in 1987, his estate was worth approximately $200 million. That money has been growing for 38 years under professional management. My brain struggled to process this information. Great-grandfather Silicon Valley entrepreneur. My mother had never mentioned any wealthy relatives. We'd lived paycheck to paycheck my entire life, worrying about mortgage payments and grocery budgets. How could we be connected to some kind of tech fortune? Patricia continued the explanation with patient precision. Your great-grandfather established a complex trust designed to protect his wealth from family disputes and ensure it would benefit future generations who demonstrated genuine need and character. The trust was structured to activate when his great-grandchildren reached maturity or faced life-threatening circumstances requiring legal independence from their parents. Your mother, Linda Morrison, was Thomas's granddaughter, Harrison added. But there was a bitter falling out in the family during the 1970s. Linda's father, Thomas's son Robert, completely rejected the family wealth due to disagreements about business practices and personal values. He changed his name, moved to Colorado, and raised his children to avoid any connection to the Morrison fortune. The pieces started forming a picture that seemed too incredible to believe. My mother's maiden name had been Morrison, but she told us it was a common coincidence that we had no relation to any wealthy Morrison she'd heard about. She'd apparently hidden this family connection her entire adult life. Patricia opened another section of the folder. The trust includes specific provisions that activate automatically under certain circumstances. Your 18th birthday triggered preliminary legal notifications, which is when we first attempted to contact you. But your recent medical situation and family abandonment have activated the full inheritance provisions. Harrison produced an official-looking document with multiple signatures and legal seals. Conrad Morrison. As of this morning, you are the primary beneficiary of assets worth $760 million. This includes stock holdings, real estate properties, business investments, and cash reserves that have been professionally managed for decades. The room seemed to tilt sideways as I processed this impossible information. $760 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a figure from a fictional story, rather than my actual reality. Yesterday, I was abandoned and penniless. Today, I was apparently wealthier than most small countries. Your family had no knowledge of this inheritance, Patricia explained gently. Their decision to abandon your medical care was based purely on their own financial desperation. They believed they were choosing between your uncertain recovery and their family's survival. But Harrison's next words carried a different tone, more serious and legally precise. However, Conrad, there's something else you need to understand. The trust includes a provision specifically designed to prevent exploitation or abandonment. If your immediate family voluntarily relinquishes their parental and financial responsibilities for you, they are permanently excluded from any inheritance benefits. The implications hit me like a second accident. You mean, by signing the hospital abandonment papers and leaving that note, your family has legally forfeited any claim to your wealth? Patricia confirmed. They didn't know about the money when they made their decision, which makes this both tragic and irreversible. They abandoned you for nothing, and now they've lost everything they never knew they had. The irony was so devastating, it almost felt like cosmic justice. My family had calculated that my life wasn't worth their financial sacrifice. Now they'd discover that their sacrifice could have solved every financial problem they'd ever had, but their abandonment made them ineligible to benefit from it. I was no longer the abandoned son of a failed construction worker. I was Conrad Morrison, one of the wealthiest young men in America, with the power to forgive or condemn the family who'd thrown me away. Patricia and Harrison spent the next 4 hours transforming my understanding of reality. The Morrison Trust wasn't just money sitting in bank accounts. It was a carefully managed empire of investments, properties, and businesses that generated millions of dollars in annual income. Harrison opened his laptop and showed me spreadsheets that read like fantasy novels. Morrison Technologies owned patents for early computer components that modern tech companies still licensed. Morrison Communications held real estate in downtown San Francisco that was now worth more than most people could comprehend. Morrison Investments had stakes in companies whose names I recognized from television commercials and smartphone apps. The trust has been managed by Caldwell Preston and Associates, one of California's most prestigious wealth management firms, Patricia explained. They've grown your great-grandfather's original fortune nearly fourfold through conservative investments and strategic acquisitions. Within hours, my legal status changed completely. Patricia arranged my immediate transfer to Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital's private medical pavilion, a facility that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. My new room featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains' hardwood floors and furniture that belonged in expensive homes rather than medical facilities. A team of private physicians reviewed my case, ordering advanced tests and therapies that hadn't been available at the county hospital. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a neurologist who specialized in coma recovery, examined me with equipment that looked like it belonged on a space station. "Your recovery is actually quite remarkable," she said. "With proper rehabilitation, you should regain full cognitive and physical function within 6 to 12 months. Personal assistants appeared to handle logistics I'd never considered. Someone coordinated with my insurance companies to ensure all previous medical bills were resolved. Another assistant arranged for a private chef to prepare meals designed to support my recovery. A third person managed media inquiries because apparently my story was attracting attention from news outlets across Colorado. The phone calls started before noon. Hospital administrators from the county facility apologized profusely for the miscommunication about my care, suddenly very interested in maintaining a relationship with someone of my financial status. Investment advisors requested meetings to discuss portfolio management. Real estate agents offered to show me properties that could serve as permanent residences, but the most important calls were the ones I didn't take. Patricia's assistant fielded dozens of attempts from my family members, each message more desperate than the last. Dad's first voicemail was barely coherent. "Conrad, son, there's been a terrible mistake. We never meant to abandon you permanently. We were just trying to arrange temporary care while we got back on our feet financially." Mom's messages were heartbreaking. "Baby, please call us back. We love you so much. We were just scared and confused. We thought we were doing what was best for everyone. Please don't hate us forever." Sarah's nursing background made her messages clinically precise, but emotionally devastated. Conrad: "I understand if you never forgive us, but please know we made our decision based on incomplete information. If we'd known about your legal status, everything would have been different." Jake's calls carried the weight of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. "Brother, I know we screwed up beyond forgiveness, but we're family. That has to count for something, right?" Patricia showed me local news coverage of my story. Channel 7 had run a feature called "Local Construction Worker Inherits Tech Fortune," complete with file footage of my accident scene and interviews with Dad's former construction crew. The segment had aired during the morning news, which meant my family discovered their mistake while thousands of Denver residents learned about it simultaneously. Harrison's phone buzzed with updates from his contacts at various institutions. "Your family has been making increasingly frantic attempts to reach hospital administrators' lawyers and anyone they think might have influence over your situation," he reported. "They're clearly in panic mode." The security desk called to announce that my family had arrived at the hospital. Through my window, I could see them in the parking lot below. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years and 3 months, his hair completely gray, and his normally straight shoulders bent with defeat. Mom was crying openly, clutching tissues that couldn't contain her tears. Sarah and Jake both looked pale and desperate, like people who just realized they'd thrown away winning lottery tickets. They'd brought signs and were holding them up toward my window. "Please forgive us. We love you, and we made a mistake." The sight of my family reduced to begging for attention through hospital windows should have felt like victory, but it just felt sad. A security guard approached them, and I watched Dad gesture frantically while showing some kind of identification. Mom collapsed into Sarah's arms, her grief visible even from 8 floors above. Jake paced in circles occasionally, stopping to stare up at the building like he could will me to appear at a window. Patricia returned from a conversation with hospital security. "Your family is requesting permission to see you, but they're not being allowed access without your explicit consent. Hospital policy is very strict about protecting patients from unwanted contact." The most devastating detail came from Harrison's research team. "Conrad, we've learned that your family's financial situation is actually worse now than when they abandoned you. In their panic to undo their decision, they've made some desperate choices." He showed me documentation that painted a picture of complete family destruction. Dad had sold the family home to a cash buyer for 60% of its value, trying to raise money for expensive lawyers who promised to challenge the abandonment papers. Mom had borrowed against her retirement account to pay for flights back to Denver and hotel rooms near the hospital. Sarah had withdrawn her remaining financial aid refunds, and Jake had sold everything he owned. "They're currently staying at the Salvation Army shelter downtown," Patricia added quietly. "They've essentially destroyed their lives in a desperate attempt to undo their abandonment of you." The irony was almost too cruel to comprehend. They'd abandoned me to avoid financial ruin, but their abandonment triggered financial ruin anyway. They'd lost their home, their business, and their future, while the money that could have saved everything sat in accounts they didn't know existed. Looking down at my desperate family in the parking lot, I realized I held their fate in my hands. I could forgive them and share my fortune, legally exclude them forever, or find some middle ground that served both justice and mercy. For the first time in my life, I had power over people who'd always had power over me. The question was, what kind of man did I want to become with that power? I spent 3 days wrestling with the decision that would define the rest of my life and my family's future. Patricia advised patients, suggesting that emotional choices about wealth often led to long-term regret. Harrison warned about the psychological complexities of sudden fortune, particularly when combined with family trauma. Dr. Chen recommended avoiding stress during my critical recovery period, but I couldn't heal properly with this unresolved weight crushing my spirit. I needed to understand whether my family's abandonment came from callous selfishness or desperate circumstance. The answer would determine whether justice required punishment or offered an opportunity for redemption. I requested a comprehensive investigation into my family's financial situation during my coma. Harrison's research team worked with forensic accountants to analyze bank records, mortgage documents, insurance policies, and business finances. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking in its complexity. Dad's construction business had been struggling even before my accident. 3 major clients had delayed payments for completed work, creating cash flow problems that predated my medical crisis. The company's insurance policy covered basic medical expenses, but had lifetime maximums that my intensive care had quickly exceeded. Within 6 weeks of my accident, Morrison Construction was facing bankruptcy regardless of my medical bills. Mom's secretary's salary covered our family's basic living expenses, but provided no cushion for emergencies. The second mortgage Dad had taken to expand his business left them with house payments that consumed 60% of their monthly income. When Mom took the night cleaning job, her additional income barely covered the gasoline needed to drive between work sites. Sarah's decision to leave nursing school wasn't just about my medical costs. The family needed immediate income to avoid losing their home, and her financial aid package required full-time enrollment that wasn't compatible with supporting the family during crisis. Her choice was between completing her education and preventing family homelessness. Jake's situation was equally impossible. His community college courses were paid for by a combination of family contribution and part-time work income. When the family crisis hit, his parents could no longer contribute and he needed to work full-time to help support everyone. Education became a luxury the family couldn't afford. The most devastating discovery was that my family had genuinely believed I might never recover consciousness. Dr. Peterson had explained that coma patients could remain in vegetative states indefinitely, requiring expensive long-term care with minimal hope of improvement. My family faced the possibility of spending their entire life savings and their children's futures on care that might never result in meaningful recovery. Their abandonment wasn't callous calculation. It was the desperate choice of drowning people who believed they had to choose between saving one family member and destroying everyone else. They were wrong to abandon me, but their decision came from love perverted by impossible circumstances, not from selfishness or greed. This understanding changed everything about how I viewed their betrayal and my responsibility to respond. I arranged a formal meeting at Patricia's law office, a downtown Denver building, with marble floors and conference rooms that felt more like courtrooms. My family arrived, looking like people attending their own execution trial. Dad wore his only remaining suit purchased from a thrift store and altered by Mom's inexpert tailoring. Mom had lost significant weight, her clothes hanging loosely on a frame, diminished by stress and poverty. Sarah and Jake both looked younger and older simultaneously, their faces carrying the premature aging that comes from adult responsibilities thrust upon people unprepared for them. I sat across the conference table, wearing a custom suit Patricia had arranged, surrounded by legal advisors who represented my new status as one of Colorado's wealthiest individuals. The contrast with my family's desperate appearance was intentional and brutal. "Hello, Dad," I said, my voice carrying none of the warmth that had characterized our relationship before the accident. Michael Morrison, the man who'd taught me to swing a hammer and pour concrete, couldn't meet my eyes. I addressed each family member individually, methodically dismantling their previous justifications and excuses. I told Dad about hearing his phone calls with the state facility discussing my transfer like I was a piece of unwanted equipment. I confronted Mom about packing my personal belongings while I lay unconscious, preparing to erase my presence from their lives. I challenged Sarah about her clinical discussions of my condition reducing my humanity to medical terminology and statistical probabilities. I questioned Jake about his farewell speech delivered like a eulogy for someone who was still alive but had become inconveniently expensive. Each family member broke down as I systematically exposed their failures and betrayals. Dad admitted that choosing financial survival over his son's life violated every principle he'd tried to teach me about family loyalty and moral responsibility. Mom confessed that she'd been too weak and frightened to fight for me when I needed her strength most. Sarah acknowledged that her nursing education should have made her a better advocate for my care, not a more efficient calculator of my recovery probabilities. Jake admitted he'd been a coward who followed his parents' lead instead of standing up for his brother's right to live. But as I watched my family absorb the full weight of their guilt and shame, I realized something important about my own character. I could destroy them completely with a few words, condemning them to poverty and exclusion forever. Or I could use my power to create something better than revenge. The final test came when I revealed that I'd had them investigated. "I know about the business problems that existed before my accident," I said. "I know about the insurance limitations, the mortgage payments, the impossible financial pressures you were facing." Dad's face crumpled with relief that I understood their circumstances, but I wasn't finished. "I also know that you abandoned me without ever trying to have the conversation you should have had. You never asked me what I wanted. You never explored alternatives. You made a unilateral decision about my life because it was easier than fighting for solutions. The moment of truth had arrived. My family sat across from me, broken and desperate, waiting to learn whether I would show mercy or deliver the justice they deserved. The decision I made would reveal not just their character but mine. After everything I'd learned about my family's circumstances, their betrayal, and my own newfound power, I made a decision that surprised everyone in that conference room, including myself. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about creating consequences that led to growth, understanding, and genuine change. I'm not going to destroy you, I told my stunned family. But I'm not going to rescue you either. Not the way you're hoping. Patricia and Harrison exchanged glances as I outlined my plan. It was more complex than simple forgiveness or outright rejection, designed to address both the pain they'd caused and the love that still existed between us. Dad, you're going to rebuild your construction business, but you're going to do it honestly and independently. I'll provide you with a basic apartment and enough money for food and transportation for 1 year. After that, you succeed or fail based on your own efforts. No shortcuts, no family money, no safety net beyond what any decent employer would provide. Michael nodded slowly, understanding that I was offering him a chance to prove himself rather than simply restoring his previous life. I'll loan you $10,000 to purchase basic tools and equipment with a 3-year repayment schedule at market interest rates. You'll earn back my respect the same way you built your original business through honest work and ethical treatment of employees. For Mom, I designed a different path to redemption. Linda, you're going to complete training as a family counselor specializing in medical crisis intervention. I'll pay for your education and provide living expenses during your studies, but you'll work with families facing situations like ours. You'll help other people avoid the mistakes we made. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she realized I was giving her a chance to transform her guilt into something useful. You'll counsel families with hospitalized children, teaching them about resources, options, and communication strategies we never learned. Your experience with abandoning me will become your qualification for preventing other families from making similar choices. Sarah's path combined her medical training with accountability for her actions. You'll return to nursing school and complete your degree, but you'll specialize in coma patient care and family advocacy. I'll pay your tuition and expenses, but you'll graduate with honors and commit to 5 years working with patients like I was. You'll learn about patients' rights, family counseling resources, and ethical decision-making in medical crises. Your education will make you the kind of nurse who prevents families from abandoning their children, not one who facilitates those decisions through clinical detachment. Jake's consequences reflected his youth and potential for growth. You'll complete your business degree, but you'll add courses in ethics, nonprofit management, and social responsibility. When you graduate, you'll work for my charitable foundation, learning to manage programs that help other families avoid our situation. Your business education will focus on creating safety nets for working families facing medical emergencies. You'll develop programs, manage resources, and ensure other young men don't get abandoned by families who feel they have no other choice. The most important element of my plan was ongoing accountability. None of this is charity, I explained. You'll all report your progress monthly, meet to specific benchmarks, and prove your commitment through sustained effort over time. If you fail to meet these requirements, the support ends immediately. I established a structured timeline for rebuilding our family relationships. Family dinners will resume when everyone has completed 6 months of their programs successfully. Holiday gatherings will happen when you've all demonstrated genuine growth and change. Trust will be rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through apologies or promises. The financial structure was deliberately challenging, but not impossible. Each family member had to succeed through their own efforts while having enough support to avoid the desperation that had led to my abandonment. They would earn their way back into my life, instead of simply being forgiven and restored to their previous positions. Over the next 18 months, I watched my family transform themselves in ways that pure forgiveness never could have achieved. Dad's new construction business succeeded through honest bidding, quality workmanship, and ethical treatment of employees. He hired 3 full-time workers and specialized in home modifications for disabled families work that connected directly to his experience with my medical crisis. Mom completed her counseling certification with academic honors and began working at Presbyterian St. Joseph Hospital, helping families navigate medical emergencies with comprehensive support resources. Her personal experience with abandoning a hospitalized child gave her unique credibility with families facing similar pressures. Sarah graduated nursing school with highest honors and specialized in neurological recovery care. She developed protocols for family communication during coma treatment and created support groups for relatives of long-term patients. Her work prevented countless families from making the decision that had destroyed ours. Jake completed his business degree while working part-time for the Morrison Family Foundation, which I'd established to provide emergency financial assistance for families with hospitalized children. He created scholarship programs for students whose education was interrupted by family medical crises, and developed rapid response funding for families facing bankruptcy due to medical bills. My own transformation was equally significant. Managing enormous wealth taught me about responsibility legacy and the difference between justice and revenge. I established multiple charitable foundations, created scholarship programs, and invested in businesses that provided good jobs for working families like mine had been. The Morrison Trust continued growing under professional management, but I used its income to create lasting, positive change across Colorado and beyond. Medical family assistance programs prevented thousands of families from facing the desperation that had nearly destroyed mine. Educational emergency funds helped students like Sarah and Jake continue their studies during family crises. Our first family dinner in 2 years happened at my new home, a beautiful house in Cherry Hills Village that was large enough for privacy but warm enough for intimacy. Dad arrived with photos of his latest construction project, a wheelchair-accessible home for a veteran injured in Afghanistan. Mom brought stories about families she'd helped navigate medical crises without abandoning their loved ones. Sarah shared updates from the neurological unit about patients who'd recovered consciousness to find their families still fighting for them. Jake presented quarterly reports on the Foundation's growing impact with statistics showing hundreds of families who'd avoided bankruptcy through emergency assistance programs. We didn't pretend the abandonment had never happened. That betrayal was part of our family history, now a scar that had healed but would always be visible. But we'd used that pain to build something better than what we'd lost. My family had learned to choose love over fear, communication over assumptions, and courage over convenience. The conversation that night included topics we'd never discussed before my accident. We talked about wealth responsibility legacy, and the difference between loving someone and enabling their worst impulses. We discussed medical ethics, family loyalty, and the importance of having difficult conversations before crises make them impossible. But we also talked about the things that had always connected us: Dad's pride in honest work, Mom's gift for nurturing growth in difficult situations, Sarah's combination of medical skill and genuine compassion, and Jake's ambitious dreams for making the world better through business innovation. The Morrison family was rebuilt on stronger foundations than before my accident. We understood each other's weaknesses and strengths more clearly. We'd tested the limits of our love and found ways to strengthen it through accountability and growth. We'd learned that forgiveness without consequences enabled repeated betrayals, but consequences without love destroyed the relationships worth preserving. As I looked around that dinner table at my family, scarred but stronger, chastened, but hopeful, grateful but not dependent, I realized we'd achieved something remarkable. We'd taken the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into a foundation for deeper love, stronger character, and more meaningful lives. My great-grandfather, Thomas Morrison, had designed his trust to benefit descendants who demonstrated genuine need and character. I'd inherited his wealth, but more importantly, I'd inherited the opportunity to use that wealth for purposes that honored both justice and mercy. The money revealed who we really were, when tested by impossible circumstances. But the choices we made after receiving that revelation determined who we would become. My family had failed their first test, but passed their second one. And in doing so, they taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or even in forgiveness, but in the wisdom to know when justice requires mercy, and when mercy requires accountability. Have you ever experienced a betrayal so devastating that it forced you to completely reevaluate your relationships with the people you love most? How do you balance holding people accountable for their actions while still maintaining space for redemption and growth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with your own experiences with family loyalty and forgiveness, please hit that like button, subscribe for more stories about overcoming life's most challenging betrayals, and share this video with someone who might need to hear about the power of choosing justice over revenge. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most painful, yet transformative experiences of my life, and I wish you the courage to find your own balance between holding others accountable and keeping your heart open to the possibility of redemption.